I'm Lisa Erlandson, and I am a certified quilted textile appraiser. I'm certified by the American Quilter Society, and I've been certified since 1998, so I don't want to do math, but I've been doing this for a while. So today I wanted to explain to you the process of doing an appraisal for a quilt, and then we'll also talk a little bit about why you should want this done. So here's what we've done. I've laid out a quilt behind me, and of course I'm not actually going to appraise it because it's my quilt and you can't appraise your own work, which kind of makes sense. No insurance company wants to hear you tell how much you think your quilt's worth, because it may or may not be exactly accurate. You may not really have that distance to work with on that. So I'm going to work with not my real equipment. I don't have my computer here. I don't have my camera here, but I'm going to walk you through. So the first thing that we do when we're looking at a quilt for appraisal is a physical examination. And this usually takes about 30 minutes of me with the quilt. And so that's all you would be expected to hang around with your quilt for. Or if your quilt's in a show, you don't even have to be there for me to do it, because you fill out a form, it's got all the information, and then I just work from that and contact you when I have questions. So here we go. All right, first thing I would do is measure the quilt. I need to know how big the quilt is. That's part of being able to give an accurate physical description of the quilt. So I would measure this way and measure this way and write that down. Now I look at the quilt itself, the quilt surface, and I say, okay, I need to describe this quilt in a way that if someone had the paper that is the appraisal, and they're looking at this giant stack of quilts, they could say, that one reads like this one looks. And of course, sure, we have photographs, but I never want to depend on just a photograph. I want my words to also create a picture of your quilt. So I would look and, if it's your quilt, I would say, do you know what pattern this is? Why, yes, I do. This is Minnesota hot dish. Okay, great. So I would write down a description. I would look and see where the block is. In this particular quilt, your block is from here to here. And so I would look and I would say, this has, it's a 15-inch block. No, I'm sorry. It's a 16.5-inch block, and measured this way, and it's like, does that work too? Yeah, it does. Actually, now it's 17, so it's not perfect, but that's okay. And so I would say, okay, now I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hey, I've got 12 blocks. So I'm writing all of this information down, and don't worry, by the time that you get the appraisal, I've prettied up the language and prettied up the terminology so that it's coherent and it sounds the best that I can make it sound. Then I'm going to look and say, well, let's see, do we have borders on this quilt? Well, we do. We have 2 borders. So you measure the border, then you measure, you measure around. And, this is not to critique the quilt. This is not anything about judging the quilt. This is about accuracy in description. That's all it is. And by the way, when I'm doing the blocks, I usually measure a couple of the blocks just to kind of make sure that the one that I measured isn't the outlier, either being larger or smaller than the others. But once again, I'm not knocking down your quilt by finding discrepancies. I'm just trying to do my job. And of course, workmanship is a part of what makes the value. So if all the blocks were wonky and didn't fit, the value of that quilt is not going to be as high as one that is exactly the same everywhere. Every measurement's perfect, every seam is perfect, everything matches, everything lays out just right. So it does play into it, but I'm not judging and critiquing your quilt. So then, back to this. So then I, once again, measure the outer borders, and I'm going to measure your binding and look at your binding and see how your binding was applied. And once again, not to critique it in any way, but to give an accurate description of what we've got here. So that's what we're doing. And we've got all of that done. Now we look at the back. And now I would normally flip the quilt over, or I would have flipped it over. I would have had it on the back to start and then flipped it, but I'm not going to do that today. But I look at the back because I want to make sure that I'm seeing everything about the quilt. So now I'm going to look at the quilting for description. So I can tell you that this is custom quilted, and on the form I would write down the type of quilting, and this we've got let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We've got an 8-petal motif with tendrils in the center of each block, surrounded by double feathers. And so I would write this stuff down. The inner border is not quilted at all. The outer border is quilted with large, I really don't know what I would call those. Yeah, I usually have time to think about it. Today I would probably just call them petals. They're kind of feathers too, so I might call them that. But that's what I would do. So I've got all of this done, and then it's like, okay, is this heavily quilted, moderately quilted, lightly quilted, functional quilting? What do we have here? And I'm going to say this is fairly heavily quilted. So that goes on the form. Now, something I just saw. Oh dear, there's a soil spot. I don't know what it looks like. It's not mud. This has been washed. I don't know if this would wash out or not, but because it's on the quilt when I'm seeing it, then what I have to do is make note of this. Now, does that ruin the quilt? No. Does it have an effect on the value? Sure. It's not a brand new quilt that was just quilted and has no blemishes. It has a blemish, but once again, that's okay. We're looking at it for what it is. I'm going to put that down. Okay, so now I also look, what other condition issues do we have? Well, it has been washed, but other than this one spot, I really don't notice fading. I don't notice any discoloration. I don't see any holes in the quilt, and looking at the back, as I said, I don't want to flip it over now. I would look and make sure that there were no holes on the back of the quilt. And then I put all of that on the appraisal form. Then after that, I take pictures. I take several pictures of the quilt, and a lot of those you never see. Those just go in my work file so that I can go back and look at things and refresh my memory as to why I wrote something. So now, that's kind of the end of me and the quilt and you all together. Following that, I take my information, I go to my sources, which include everything from knowing how much fabric costs, how much custom quilting is, how much edge-to-edge quilting is, how much it costs to have somebody bind your quilt. In other words, custom quilt making. I have that store of knowledge with constant checking online, checking with quilt shops, checking with people that do that kind of thing, just to make sure that I'm always current and always up to date on that. 2, also checking for people that make and sell finished quilts, or looking at auction sites that sell finished quilts of a new type. We're going to talk about antique in a minute, but this quilt was made about 10 years ago. So is it still new? Well, it's not brand new, and it's used. So, okay, we've got that. So I want to look for like and kind. I don't want to look at an antique quilt for this. I don't want to look at a brand new quilt. I don't want to look at a king size quilt. I don't want to look at a miniature quilt. I don't want to look at a really simple 4-patch that is poorly quilted. I'm looking for things that are even with this. They're not exactly like this, but they're even with this, okay? So that's what I do, and I look at more than one source. I compare, and I come up with, based on my experience and my training and what is required of me by my certifying committee, a certifying association, what I need to establish a value for your quilt. Now, could you go and sell it for the value that I give you? Well, not if you wanted an insurance replacement value. If you wanted fair market, then I look at different places for that a lot of times. But what I'm doing most of the time for insurance, most quilt appraisals are for insurance. And for most of those, I'm looking, and I would be telling your insurance company, no, it's not just fabric and batting. It's also labor. It's also skill. It's also artistry. And it's also experience and level of workmanship. And so this is what you should compensate the insurance policy holder for if something were to happen to this quilt. Now, could you go buy another quilt exactly like that? Probably not. But could you commission somebody to make a quilt for you that was very similar to that based on age and wear and workmanship? I hope so. I hope so, because that's what I'm trying to do. And I am your advocate with your insurance company too. They contact me and say, what were you thinking? Why is this quilt worth more than just the 10 yards of fabric that are in it? Well, that's when I get to talk to them and explain to them everything that we're just talking about right now. So now, what if you have an antique quilt? Well, it's different. The examination part is still the same. But we do different things to establish the value. Then I look at, obviously not remaking the quilt. You can't do that. I can't remake a 75-year-old quilt or a 120-year-old quilt. But I can look and I can find prices that were paid for quilts that, once again, are they exactly like yours? Probably not. But would it be on the same level? You have a 1930s double wedding ring quilt that is in perfect condition, never used, never even washed. Still has the pencil marks on the quilting. Hand-pieced, hand-quilted. It's out of your family's clothes. Well, I can't do anything about that part, but I can find values that are for a 1930s double wedding ring that has never been used, is in perfect condition, that is hand-pieced and hand-quilted. It's not made of anybody's clothes that you are related to, but it's still the same. Now, what if you had a 1870s quilt that was in perfect condition? Well, that 1930s quilt value is not the same. We're not talking about the same age. What if your quilt is not in perfect condition? Well, then I have to put that into the mix so that I can say, well, now we're going to be looking for values for quilts that were not in perfect condition, that had some wear, that the binding was frayed on, that had a stain on them, that the fabric had faded from use. Is it not worth appraising? I don't know. We have to talk about that. I have a set value that I say, if your quilt's worth less than $250, do you really want to pay me to write an appraisal? That's up to you. Some people say yes because they're having others appraised. Some people say, no, that's okay. I was just curious anyway. So we talk about that. And if you're not near me, then sure, you find another appraiser and you talk to them about it. And they're going to be honest with you and they're going to work in your best interest. if you are my client, I try to work in your best interest with everything. Does that mean that I will put a value that is inflated? No, because that's on me. That's not coming back on you. That will come back on me. So I'm not doing that. Will I work to find the best value that I can get on your quilts? Yes. Will I give the best descriptions that I can? Yes. Will I take the best pictures I can? Yes, that depends on the situation and the lighting. Sometimes they're not great photos, but I sure try. I try to do it because I love all of your quilts. I love all of them. Okay, now, before we wrap up, why do you even want it appraised? Well, like I said, the number one reason is insurance. If you're shipping a quilt, if you're displaying a quilt, if you're storing a quilt, if you're gifting a quilt, in any of these situations, including it can be in the top of your closet, or it could be tucked under a bed, something could happen and damage your quilt. You don't want to hear all of the horror stories, but let me just tell you that they include everything from busted water heaters to upstairs leaks dripping into a downstairs closet, bad situation, to hailstorms blowing out windows, to tornadoes taking part of roof off so that it rained in the house, to rear-end collisions with the quilt in the trunk of the car, to lost packages or damaged packages so that when the recipient gets your box with the quilt in it, there's a big chunk out of the box. So there's a lot of reasons to have it appraised. I've had people that have them appraised so that when they give them as a gift, that the recipient of the quilt understands that this is an item of value. It's something important. And some people know that already, and some people maybe need to be reminded a little bit, and that's okay, whatever we have to do. So that's why you do it. Now, if you are making a donation of a quilt, then you might need a fair market value appraisal, and I can do those. If you want to sell your quilts, you might want a fair market value appraisal. Let me go back to the donation for a minute. Two things about that. It's called a donation appraisal, but it's based on fair market value because that's how the IRS has it set up. And if you make a quilt and you want to donate it, don't get it appraised, because you can't deduct the appraised value if you made the quilt. You can only deduct your materials, and that is an IRS setup. Nothing I have any control. It's the same thing as if you paint a painting and donate it. You can only deduct the materials, the paints, the brushes, the canvas that you use to do that. So any artwork that you create and donate, you can't take the full value of. But anyway, I don't know enough about that to tell you any more than that. So don't ask me. I can't tell you. Let's see, what else did I need to tell you? Oh, hey, my awesome shirt that you see is from my friend Tara Miller at quiltdistrict.com. So you want to get a cool shirt. She's got like multiples, and you can get them in any color. And I get nothing out of saying that except that I love my shirt. And so I wanted to let you know that, quiltdistrict.com. And if you're wondering what this is a compression sleeve to prevent lymphedema, which leads me to tell you, get your mammograms every year. Or if somebody you love needs a mammogram, make them get it every year, because breast cancer sucks, and we need to take all the care we can of the people in our lives that are susceptible to it, which is kind of like everybody. So get that taken care of. And this is okay. This is a easy fix for preventing lymphedema from having lymph nodes removed after breast cancer diagnosis. So if you are wondering, no, I don't pretend I have a tattoo. It's just something. Get your mammograms. I think that's all I got for you now. You got a question? You need to talk to me? Okay, well, you can get a hold of me at Lisa at lequilts.com. And that's going to be right there on the bottom of your screen so that you can see that. I am on Facebook under LE Quilts. I have a website, lequilts.com, and I also do quilt show judging and lectures mostly about antique quilts, which, hey, there's a video coming about a few of my antique quilts, so you need to hang on and look for that. And I think that's about all that I've got for you today. So hey, you know what? Enjoy your quilts. Bye.